One thing I talk a lot about on this channel when it comes to movies is my love of a specific genre of cinema. It's a subgenre of science fiction, and it is the end of the world movie, aka the post-apocalypse movie. My entire original channel is called, was called Cinepocalypse. My on YouTube is called Cinepocalypse Online. So the word apocalypse is there because of my obsession with movies that deal with the end of the world, or the world after a apocalyptic event has ruined 90% of the world. My favorite TV shows are The Walking Dead and Survivors from the 1970s, Jericho, which is a post-nuclear show. My favorite movies are like the Mad Max movies and like Dawn of the Dead, which is a zombie apocalypse movie. So I'm very much into that aspect of like science fiction cinema and horror cinema as well. The zombie apocalypse, the post-nuclear apocalypse can be horror and science fiction. So the idea with these videos, because there's going to be a series of videos, is to delve into that specific genre, because I've never done an actual video on my favorite post-apocalypse movies. I've talked a lot about them in previous videos, but I've never really looked at the genre as a whole, starting from the very first beginning, because it's a genre that I know a fair bit about, and it's a genre that I'm really, really interested in, and I'm hoping I can get you guys interested too. So yeah, so the idea is to have like a deep dive, or a brief deep dive into the origins of the post-apocalyptic genre in film, and go through different periods up until now, modern day. So this is part one. This is looking at the 1930s until the 1960s. This is going to take a lot of films in, and I'll talk about them as much as I can. I won't go into too much detail, but I will be listing them, I guess, in release order. Some of these I do have on physical media, but they're either in storage or I just can't get to them. So you will see either clips or movie posters, either here or here, and I will overlay some clips if I can find them. So what is the post-apocalyptic movie genre? It is a subgenre of science fiction, most notably science fiction. Like I said, it can be used in horror, but it is a subsection or a subgenre of science fiction, sci-fi, that depicts either the during or the post world, according from a post world after a catastrophic event has essentially ended mankind. And there are survivors, obviously, but we find these are the people that we follow. So when you really think about the genre, like the big names of the genre are the Mad Max movie. Mad Max is the number one post-apocalyptic cinema film. And then you've got things like Dawn of the Dead, like I mentioned, which shows a zombie apocalypse in its throes. I'm not going to include Night of the Living Dead because that is it's not necessarily post-apocalyptic, but whereas you look at something like Day of the Dead or Dawn of the Dead, you will see that there are elements of that could be deemed as post-apocalyptic or apocalyptic. So Dawn of the Dead is apocalyptic, Day of the Dead is post-apocalyptic, and then you follow it with Land of the Dead, which is post-apocalyptic. But when you really think about the genre, you have to look back to where it literally started. Like the first instance of the end of the world or the lone survivor in a post-whatever world goes all the way back to The Last Man, which is a short story or a short novel that was written by Mary Shelley, who created Frankenstein, who wrote Frankenstein. That is like the first sort of acknowledged written post-apocalyptic fiction, which is really, really interesting to go back. But then also you've got things like The Time Machine by H.G. Wells, which, again, while it's set in a specific time period as to when it was written, it also features the future, where the time traveller discovers that the world has sort of ended and become this sort of weird dystopian futuristic landscape with the Eloi and the Morlocks and stuff. It's very interesting, same as H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. But on film, the first instance of a catastrophic event causing the destruction of the planet, or in a way, this the lowering of the percentage of humans on the planet, is 1933's Deluge, which is a film that is about a huge flood that basically wipes out mankind. That is the first sort of real on-screen apocalyptic event that depicted on film, is the first apocalyptic event, which is that's 1933. And there wasn't really a huge amount of films like that at the time. There was none. That was sort of a turning point for the actual genre. You could say it's the first disaster movie. And then you move a bit further. So that was 1933, and it was nearly another 20 years until you got another sort of film that would look at destruction. So in Deluge, it's a flood that literally destroys buildings, and it's an interesting movie. But so it's the first instance of seeing nature destroying civilization. So like I said, the huge flood and buildings being washed away, people drowning and stuff. So you got to then look at the 20 years later in 1951. I say 20 years, it's 18 years later, 1951. There's a film that comes out, big science fiction film called When Worlds Collide, which is about scientists who discover that a planet is heading towards Earth, and it is likely to collide with our planet. And it's all about a group of scientists who are able to build a rocket to take survivors to another planet. And that film ends with, again, like Deluge, a huge, massive destruction that would essentially wipe out mankind. It's very much a bit like Moonfall, although better than Moonfall. But also, so that is the end of the world due to cosmic a disaster or something, a cosmic event that would cause the end of humanity on our planet. And then the same year, in 1951, there was a film called Five, which is a film set after a nuclear attack, and it follows five people, a woman and four of the men, and that is probably the first post-nuclear depiction of life after an atomic bomb has wiped out everyone. And it's an interesting movie, especially for the time period. It's quite grim as well. It's black and white, and it's written and directed by a man called Arch Obler, who I think was one of those radio personalities and radio writer back in the 1940s and 1950s. But the film is interesting. The film is interesting because it was filmed in and around a Frank Lloyd Wright house. Frank Lloyd Wright was a architect, who's well known in Los Angeles for making these weird sort of what they call it, Art Deco and like very interesting style buildings. I mean, if you look at the original House on a Haunted Hill with Vincent Price, well, that film is also shot in a Frank Lloyd Wright building. But 5 is a very interesting film because it was the first film to depict what it would be like after a nuclear attack or an atomic attack. Then you've got, again, like 2 years later, we've got War of the Worlds. In 1953, War of the Worlds, more an alien invasion film than a post-apocalyptic movie, but there are elements of like what the world would look like after that. So when you watch George Pal's War of the Worlds and see like the destruction that the hovering aliens do, because obviously War of the Worlds is originally, it had tripods in it. War of the Worlds is I don't know, it's a weird one including War of the Worlds on this little deep dive thing, because it's not specifically post-apocalyptic. It's, I guess, apocalyptic, not post. Pre-apocalypse would just be like normal day. But it's an interesting film to include because, like I said, it does have elements of like apocalypse scenario, like an apocalyptic scenario in it. Alien invasion, destruction of cities, the death of multiple people. But then when you go to 1955 and you've got Roger Corman, and Roger Corman takes certain elements. So you take the element of 5, of a group of people in a post-apocalyptic, well, post-nuclear or post-atomic America, but you drop the budget to about £45, and you include a monster in that film. You get The Day the World Ended from 1955, a great movie about a load of people who holed up in a house owned by a survivalist, I guess you could say, or a prepper, like a 1950s prepper, in a valley that is somehow shielded from the fallout. But the fallout has, for some reason, created this atomic monster. It's very 1950s, very Red Scare, very Roger Corman. It's very Roger Corman. It sort of reminds me of the robot monster, with the monster that was basically, it was a dude in a bear suit with a fishbowl on his head. It's crap. Whereas Day the World Ended is a little bit more interesting and a little bit better. But Day the World Ended it's a very, very low budget movie, and we will find that studios will start making like higher budget movies set within this scenario, not the monster scenario, but the atomic attack scenario. So in 1959, Warner Brothers made the film The World, the Flesh and the Devil. It was based on a book called The Purple Cloud by M.P. Shiel, and it's a very good book, by the way. But the film is also very, very good, which is really, really difficult to come by. I don't think it's had a release anywhere apart from maybe an old Warner Archives release, when Warner Archives were doing the DVD on demand thing. But 1959, The World, the Flesh and the Devil comes out. It stars Harry Belafonte, Mel Ferrer. Is it Mel Ferrer or Jose Ferrer? I think it's Mel Ferrer. I will have to double check that. And I can't remember the name of the woman now. This is so annoying. But the interesting thing about The World, the Flesh and the Devil is that the main character is played by Harry Belafonte, who is a man of African descent, so he's a black guy, and at a time, specifically 1959, when you think like the racial divide and segregation and all that in America, and having a black actor on screen in a lead role trying to romance a white woman opposite a white American, played by Jose Ferrer, which is weird because I think Jose Ferrer is more Is it Mel? I don't know. I think it's Mel Ferrer. I have to double check, like I said. So the plot is that Harry Belafonte plays a miner who gets trapped underground after what I assume would be an atomic attack. It's never really mentioned, but he manages to find his way out of the cave or the tunnel or whatever he was stuck in, to find that Los Angeles is completely empty. Like it's deserted, completely deserted. He then believes that he might be the last man alive until he comes across a woman, and he then they start to then sort of form a sort of relationship. And it's, bear in mind, this is 1959, so there is a black lead actor romancing a white lead actress, and that was sort of a no-no. It was not really looked upon favourably in 1959. So there's a lot of balls on screen there straight away with what they decided to do. But then he finds they come across then Mel or Jose Ferrer. I can't remember which one. I'm going to say Mel Ferrer, who then they start to form a sort of love triangle between the three of them, and it sort of ends with a cat and mouse game between Ferrer and Harry Belafonte as they chase each other through the streets of a deserted Los Angeles, with one trying to kill the other so he can have the woman. It's a very, very good film, and very much, if you can find it, I would highly recommend tracking it down and checking it out, because you won't be disappointed. I've got a copy of it that I managed to download, and I made a sort of what's the word for it? I made a bootleg copy for myself. Again, we then move on to back to Roger Corman, who has also taken basically the plot of The World, the Flesh and the Devil and dropped the budget to about 45 quid and gave us part of what was called his Puerto Rico trilogy. And this is a film that was written by Robert Towne, who famously wrote Chinatown, which is essentially looked at as the best example of, or probably the greatest screenplay of all time. A lot of people say Chinatown by Robert Towne is the greatest screenplay of all time. It's a fantastic screenplay. Boring movie, but it's a fantastic screenplay. So Robert Towne wrote this film. It's called The Last Woman on Earth. He also co-stars in the film as well. And again, it kind of has the same sort of plot of a love triangle between three different people. It's about a group of friends, or three friends, who have gone scuba diving off the coast of Puerto Rico when there is a big cloud that engulfs their boat, and when they return to shore they find that there is no one around, and it's them basically then trying to work out and survive in this world where there are only three of them. And again, like in World, the Flesh and the Devil, there is a love triangle that is formed, and then it all goes tits up, as you'd expect. But The Last Woman on Earth, it's an interesting film. It's a good film. I like it. I like a lot of bizarre, low budget, end of the world type movies. But then you've got to go to the UK. The UK have a kind of a good history of science fiction. Some of it low budget, some of it higher budget. So you got the stuff from specifically science fiction. You have obviously War of the Worlds was originally set in the UK, but you've also got the Quatermass character who appeared in multiple different movies, and there were television seasons, and obviously Doctor Who is a huge influence on British science fiction. But one film not enough people really talk about it, and I've talked about it before, and I think it's a cracking movie, is The Day the Earth Caught Fire from 1961. Day the Earth Caught Fire is not so much a post-apocalyptic movie, but it is, again, like it is a apocalyptic film. It's not post-apocalyptic because it's not necessarily set after the incident. It is. It's all about the build-up and how things are changing. It's very much. It's like a look at climate change, but in 1961. It stars Edward Judd as a reporter for a magazine, or for a newspaper, who discovers that the testing of nuclear bombs has thrown the Earth off its axis, and started to send the Earth hurtling towards the sun. It's an interesting premise for 1961. But the great thing about The Day the Earth Caught Fire is that it's shot in such an odd style. It's shot almost like a documentary in a way. It's not your usual like camera setups, if you know what I mean. It was very well made. It's got young Michael Caine in it as a police officer. And there's scenes in it that you wouldn't expect to see in a film from 1961. Specifically, moments between Edward Judd and I think it's Dana Andrews, who is gorgeous, by the way. Bear in mind, this is 1961, so like censorship in the UK is quite bad. So a lot of things get censored in the UK. You see lady bits in 1961, black and white lady bits. But then the following year, back in America, in 1962, we have a film that I talked about the other day, which I picked up on Blu-ray, is the film Panic in Year Zero, which is, in a way, it's sort of a bit like The World, the Flesh and the Devil, and a bit like the film Five, which I mentioned earlier, from 1951. Panic in Year Zero is a film that deals with a family coming to terms and learning to survive in the direct aftermath of an atomic blast on Los Angeles. And it's not straight post-apocalyptic. It's not like 10 years down the line or anything. It is the direct aftermath. They are on a road trip vacation. They've got a caravan, and they end up having to pull over and notice that in the background there is a big white flash, and Los Angeles has been nuked. But then the father of the family, he's got his head screwed on, former military man. His instinct is to just get enough stuff that they can survive on and go and find a place that they can like shelter from either fallout or like gangs of people, because he knows that shit is going to go down and he needs to get his family to a safe place. He's a very stern, very hard man. He's played by Ray Milland, who also directed the film. You've got Gene Hagen as well, who played his wife. I think, is it Frankie Avalon played the son? I can't remember the name of the daughter. But there's a lot of themes in there that you wouldn't expect from 1962. So there's a theme of rape. There's themes of vandalism and looting and like overcharging for gas. Like it's just, I would highly recommend checking out Panic in Year Zero. There is a really good mini thing that Joe Dante, the director of Inner Space and The Howling, did on his Trailers from Hell, where he talked about Panic in Year Zero. It's on the Blu-ray from Radiance as well. So I highly recommend checking that out, because it is a fantastic movie. And if you look past the sort of 1960s jazz score, you'll thoroughly enjoy it, because it is great. But the same year that came out is another film that is very similar to that, called This Is Not a Test, in 1962 as well, which is about a police officer who sort of hears that there's the possibility of a atomic strike. And yeah, I mean, This Is Not a Test it's an interesting film. You can get it on those low budget, well, those cheap sort of 100 movie packs from Mill Creek, what Mill Creek used to do. That's how I saw it. But yeah, This Is Not a Test. It's okay. I would say Day the Earth Caught... No, Panic in Year Zero is probably the better of the two. Well, definitely the better of the two. I'd swear on it. So yeah, This Is Not a Test. It's worth watching. If you can find a copy, I think it might be on YouTube. So I would highly recommend checking that out just to compare to Panic in Year Zero. But then you've got something a little bit different. The same year, 1962. 1962 was quite a good year. So you had Panic in Year Zero and This Is Not a Test. And then you had this, which is an adaptation of a very famous science fiction novel, which has been remade twice post this original version. So 1962's version of Day of the Triffids, based on the novel by John Wyndham, is an interesting adaptation of the source novel, because it does kind of change quite a bit. I mean, Howard Keel plays the main character who wakes up in hospital after having surgery on his eyes. And he was a lucky one because his eyes were bandaged. He was unable to see a what they call it, an asteroid or light show in the sky, a natural light show in the sky, which unfortunately has blinded pretty much everyone. And he is one of the only people who is able to see. And in the source novel, the main character is actually he's what's known as a Triffid farmer. In the movie, he's a sailor, which I don't understand. I think is the reason why they got Howard Keel to play the character, but had to explain why he was American, so he was a sailor, instead of just being a Triffid farmer or just being an American who lives in the UK. But it has that really cool sort of not backwards, but like country lane, British country lane, countryside sort of muddy, grim feel to it. And yeah, I mean, I would love to see a 4K restoration of that film, because while it is probably the lesser adaptation of that, well, maybe not the lesser, that would be the 2009 version with Dougray Scott, which is shit. I'd say, yeah, it's a fun science fiction movie, a fun adaptation of the John Wyndham novel. Nowhere near as good as the 1982 BBC adaptation of Day of the Triffids. And then you follow up the Day of the Triffids with another film that is based on a very famous science fiction stroke horror novel, which is The Last Man on Earth from 1964, based on I Am Legend by Richard Matheson. If you have seen I Am Legend with Will Smith, you will know that it has previously been adapted twice before, starting in 1964 with The Last Man on Earth starring Vincent Price, and then in 1971 as The Omega Man starring Charlton Heston. But we're going to look at The Last Man on Earth first. The Last Man on Earth is probably the closest that a filmmaker has got to adapting I Am Legend to screen. That's probably because the screenplay for the film was actually written by the author, Richard Matheson, who obviously is a big name in science fiction and horror and suspense and stuff as a novelist, but also as a screenwriter. He wrote Steven Spielberg's Jewel, by the way, and The Incredible Shrinking Man as well. So yeah, he's a very well-known science fiction writer. But The Last Man on Earth is, like I said, an adaptation of his novel I Am Legend, which is about a scientist in a post-apocalyptic city, after a virus has turned the majority of mankind into vampires, and it follows he's a scientist, so he's trying to work out why the virus has done this, how it can be changed and stuff. And he finds that it's safe in the daytime, but in the nighttime he has to lock himself away in this like fortified house and stuff. It's great. Vincent Price is fantastic in it. The cinematography is really, really great. If you can find the widescreen remaster, because there are a lot of public domain versions of it which are fucking unwatchable, but I highly recommend checking out the HD version, or just the remastered version in its original aspect ratio, which I did find on YouTube, so I think it might very well be there. But Last Man on Earth, fantastic. Probably, like I said, the closest any filmmaker has got to adapting I Am Legend to screen, because it was adapted by the actual author of that story. So then we have, in 1968, we have the blockbuster, the badass, one of the greatest ending twist movies of all time, Planet of the Apes, 1968, written, based on the novel by Pierre Boulle, which is a really good novel, by the way. If you haven't read it, I recommend reading it, or if you don't have time to read it, Audible have got it on their audiobooks section, and it's worth watching. But starts off with a mission to another planet, and they find out that they crash land. Well, they crash land on another planet. Not sure which one they're on, because there's some issues in the spacecraft, and it turns out that the planet is run by monkeys, and I'm not going to talk about Planet of the fucking Apes. It's Planet of the Apes. Planet of the Apes is amazing. Go and watch Planet of the Apes, the original 1968 Charlton Heston Planet of the Apes, and then watch The End of Spaceballs. You'll love it. So yeah, Planet of the Apes, based on a novel by Pierre Boulle from 1968, obviously created that franchise of Planet of the Apes, Beneath Planet of the Apes, Escape from Planet of the Apes, Conquest, and then Battle. And then you've got the 2001 remake with Mark Wahlberg from Tim Burton, and then we have the new Apes franchise that started with Rise, then Dawn, and then War, and then now Kingdom, the Planet of the Apes. But yeah, check out Planet of the Apes. It's fucking amazing. 1968 also saw the birth of probably one of the biggest subgenres of horror that has ever been created. I mean, there was a sort of genre of this before, but it was a very different style. 1968, Night of the Living Dead. George Romero made Night of the Living Dead on a very small budget with a very small cast and crew, and basically created the modern zombie movie. If it wasn't for Night of the Living Dead, we wouldn't have The Walking Dead, you wouldn't have Dawn of the Dead, you wouldn't have Shaun of the Dead, you wouldn't have Black Summer, or whatever it was called, you wouldn't have Z Nation, you wouldn't have you wouldn't have fucking Call of Duty Zombies, we wouldn't have anything zombie related if it wasn't for George Romero's 1968's Night of the Living Dead. And while Night of the Living Dead is technically, again, not exactly post-apocalyptic, it's very much like Dawn of the Dead, where it's a apocalyptic film that takes place during an apocalypse, whereas, like I said, Day of the Dead is post-apocalyptic. It's post zombie invasion and stuff. But Night of the Living Dead, if you haven't seen it, the Criterion release is incredible. It's now come out on 4K on Criterion. Highly recommend getting that version. If you can't afford that one, you might still be able to find the Optimum Blu-ray, which is HD, which is a decent HD master and worth checking out if you can't get the Criterion. However, if you're going to get a copy of Night of the Living Dead, you get the Criterion, because it's amazing. Night of the Living Dead, they're coming to get you, Barbara. And we ended the 1960s with a film that is more like a black comedy. and it's a British black comedy. I personally, I've never seen this one, so I can't really comment a lot about it, but it's a film called The Bed Sitting Room. It was a film that had like Spike Milligan and like people of the comedy people of that era in. Like I said, I don't know a whole lot about this this specific film because I've never seen it. But there we go. I mean, there's a list of things that for you to check out. Deluge from 1933, When Worlds Collide 1951, Five from 1951, When War of the Worlds from 1953, Day the World Ended 1955, The World, the Flash and the Devil from 1959, Last Woman on Earth from 1960, Day the Earth Caught Fire from 1961, Panic in Year Zero from 1962, This Is Not a Test, also from 1962, and Day of the Triffids, also from 1962. Then you've got Last Man on Earth, like I said, is an adaptation of the novel I Am Legend from 1964, Planet of the Apes from 1968, Night of the Living Dead from 1968, and then The Bed Sitting Room from 1969, and that ends 1933 to 1969. That is every single film that I could think of that is post-apocalyptic or apocalyptic. So there we go. That's it. I know it's like not the longest video. It's it's a fairly long film, considering that is only part one, and that covers 1930s to 1960s. Hope you enjoyed this. There is going to be multiple parts of this video. Like I said, I will either find some clips or I will find some poster artwork which will appear on here somewhere, and this is going to take a while. By the time you've seen this video will have been edited. So part 2 will cover the 1970s. It won't be covering more than the 1970s because there are a lot of films from the 1970s. Part 3 will cover the 1980s, and part 4 will cover the 1990s and probably the early 2000s. And I'll try and get up to modern day, but that is like a deep dive, a deepish dive into the sort of origins of post-apocalyptic cinema. The 1960s was an interesting decade because obviously you had the Red Scare, the Cold War, the panic of the possible nuclear strikes. You had the whole Cuban Missile Crisis and just so there was a lot of these sort of paranoia movies that came out, specifically like Panic in Year Zero and This Is Not a Test. But the 1970s is going to be very interesting because there's a lot in there, and I might go over a little bit more stuff in detail. The 1980s is probably going to be 2 parts because there are so many. Because I need to take into account the Italian rip-offs of Mad Max and some of the crappy Filipino movies as well. But thank you for watching this. Hope you really enjoyed this little sort of deep dive into some post-apocalyptic or apocalyptic cinema from the early days. My name is Pedro. This is Pedro's Movie Cavern, and as usual, I am going to give you a salute. I'm going to throw up the peace sign, and I am going to tell you that I am out. Cheers, guys. Have a good one.